Chapter 11. Something horrible happened to my brother, and I think somebody's coming. Somebody not from this world. I opened my eyes, hating myself. I'd nearly done it. Nearly lost control again. I'd tried doing to Dad what I'd done to Jake, beating him until there was nothing left. I sat up and pain shot through my neck. Jake. He was still alive. How though? His face had been beaten to mash, and he'd been shot with 5 or 6 slugs. I groaned, rising to my feet. Darkness surrounded me, with a single beam of light piercing through and illuminating drifting dust. The cave, right. We were in the cave. Focus, Matt. I stumbled to Dad's flashlight and picked it up. The light was fainter now, thinner. The batteries must be nearly dead. How long had I been out? I brought a hand to my neck and massaged it, feeling like I'd spent the night doing my best impersonation of an owl. Eric, I called, my throat dry. God, I needed a drink. Dad? My light beam swept across the cavern, revealing only scattered books and splintered wooden tables. The place had been demolished, only a handful of desks and tables still remained in one piece, and even they had their drawers pulled out and tossed. That's right, I remembered. I'd done that trying to find a weapon to fight Jake, and all Eric managed to find was a scalpel. That was the best we had. Then Dad charged in and saved our asses. Until I fucked it up. I staggered forward, still feeling like I'd been hit by a Sasquatch-shaped truck. The fuck was wrong with me? Jumping Dad like that? I tried to shake the self-loathing, but this time it was all-consuming. I'd really screwed us over. Jake had probably used our fighting as cover to make his move. And now Eric was paying the price. He'd been injected with Jake's medicine, and then forced to say Per Diem's name. To welcome the Lord beyond the veil, whatever the fuck that meant. It didn't mean anything good, I knew that much. I swept the light to the summoning circle and my stomach dropped. Its runes glowed a dull red, casting a crimson tinge to the black stone they'd been carved in. Eric! I shouted again. Dad? No. God, no. I fell back into a wooden chair, putting my head into my hands. Where were they? Please, Matthew. Not now, Mom. Please. I screamed, as loud and as hard as I could. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I didn't care. I screamed and screamed until I was out of breath, until the voices in my head shut up, and then I cried a while. Even if I could find them, how the fuck was I supposed to help them? I picked up the scalpel Eric left on the table and stared at it. Hated it. How was I supposed to save them with this? Jake took shotgun blasts and shrugged them off, and all I had was a damn scalpel, a busted wrist, and something inside of me trying to get out. It's dark. I looked up, not sure I'd heard properly. Was that? I brought the light around, scrambling from my chair, my sneakers slipping on the slick cavern floor. Nolan! I shouted, falling to my knees beside him. He was sitting upright, breathing heavy, and no longer the bipedal werewolf he'd earlier resembled. He was human again, or at least, as close as he could get with a wolf mask fused to his neck. Are you? He raised a hand, then pointed the scalpel still in my hands. Dark? Dark? I said, with more frustration than I'd meant. I felt so much angrier here on the mountain, like I was desperate for violence. I swallowed the rage. Breathe. Just breathe. The scalpel, right? He nodded, slowly, as if the act was painful in itself. What do you want with it? I said, completely at a loss. I wished he would just say some real words for once. dark. He brought a finger along his neck, tracing the stitching of the mask. You want me to cut it off of you? The mask? Another slow, pained nod. That made more sense than anything I'd heard all night. I shifted closer, and then paused. My heart thrummed in my chest, and I could feel the rage boiling inside me, thrashing to get out. I thrust the scalpel toward him. I don't trust myself right now. You do it, and I'll help you if you need it. He shook his head. Fuck. He didn't understand. There was something inside of me, and whenever I saw blood it clawed closer and closer to the surface. It had happened with Jake. It had nearly happened with my own father. I couldn't risk losing control on Nolan, not when he was all I had left. I grabbed his hand and put the scalpel in it. Just do. He recoiled with an agonized scream, his body writhing. The scalpel clattered to the floor. I leaned closer, panicked. What had I done? He cradled his hand, and I saw scorch marks on his palm. The red, seared flesh made an outline of the scalpel, and steam hissed from it in snaking tendrils. You can't touch the scalpel. I breathed, the puzzle pieces forming in my mind. But you could touch the iron gate. A decade of monster lore swam in my head. Is the scalpel silver? It's dark. Hold still, I said, doing my best to steady his head with my broken wrist. I used my good hand to make an incision along the mask's stitching. His body jerked and seized as the blade sliced through the threads, and in some places, his flesh. Nearly there, I said. A thin trail of blood wound its way from his neck down his chest, and I did my best to ignore it. Thankfully, the rancid smell of his wolf mask made a good mental anchor and helped me stay in the moment. Avoid the pull of whatever was inside of me. Please, Matthew. There, I said, cutting the last pieces of the mask free. I pocketed the scalpel. His skin was seared around the incision points, and his whole body trembled in pain. Sorry. That should do it though. He raised his hands to the mask, and lifted it slowly. The glow from its eyes faded, and the mask itself seemed to droop, the flesh sloughing from the skull and rotting away. I helped him raise it off entirely, and we dropped it to the floor. The man beneath looked a lot like Jake. He had a wide jaw, a mess of hair, and a short beard. His plaid shirt had been torn away during his previous transformation, but he still had those same jeans that Jake wore, faded from hours outdoors. It occurred to me that Jake probably gave him his clothes. Thank you, he said quietly. You can talk now? My heart raced. I had so many questions. He nodded, swallowing. I can. He ran a hand along his neck, where the mask had been cut free. Only silver could undo those bonds. I'd tried cutting it before, but they healed too quickly. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I said. Of course. I looked down, guilt bubbling in my chest. Thank you, for everything. But he got Eric. My dad too. Yes, I thought that he might. He's much stronger than I am. Do you know where he's taken them? A small ember of hope began burning inside of me. Nolan must know. He'd been here all along. Because we need to get over there now. He summoned. Predium, Nolan said, rising on shaky legs. Yes, I'm well aware of everything. The mask prevented me from speaking, not listening. He ran a hand over his ribs, breathing deeply and wincing. I'm afraid without the mask I won't be much help to you in a fight, but that's not what you need right now. You need information, and I can help with that. Hand me your light. I did, and he brought it to rest on a broken cabinet in the back corner. That'll be it. He handed the light back to me and limped toward it. I followed. Predium is powerful, perhaps too powerful to stop. But we may be able to save Eric. And my dad? Nolan didn't answer. Reaching the cabinet, he rested his body against it for a moment, taking several deep breaths. His face looked a great deal more worn than Jake's, with deep lines framing his eyes and a sallowness to his cheekbones. He looked like he was dying. "I'll just be a moment," he said. Just catching my breath. My brother, he did quite a number on me. "He's insane," I said quietly. A question ate at me, and I decided I had to ask. It might be my only opportunity to learn the truth. Is it really Grandma's doing?" Nolan smiled. "A good question." He pulled a book from the shelf and began flipping through its pages. Early in life, my mother was a writer. She loved the paranormal. Cryptids, ghouls, and the like. And I was her biggest fan. He grunted, tossing the book and plucking another. He licked the tip of his thumb and cycled a few pages. I loved reading her stories. They enthralled me. Excellent. This should be the proper text. He let his body slide down the cabinet, his finger running across a page. I held the light above him. I spent 10 years in university studying medicine, and when I returned, she was a different woman. Strange, like something had gotten to her. Gotten to her? I sat down next to him. This was a side of my grandmother I never knew. A side of my family I never knew. Mom rarely spoke about anything that happened before Eric and I were born. She'd become obsessed with Predium. At the time, I thought it was a bit of artistic madness, you know. Method acting, perhaps. Getting into character for another one of her stories. He laughed, each chuckle accentuated by a wince of pain. When she asked for my help with the science behind creating cryptids, well, I thought she was crazy. But she showed me a library of books she'd collected. He paused, taking a raspy breath. They described incredible things, things that shouldn't be possible. I stared into the dark of the cave, my voice barely a whisper. You helped her make Jake into what he is. My curiosity overcame my ethics, I confess. I agreed to another wince of pain. Attempt an experiment, but on the grounds that it be done to me and me alone. He hung his head. It wasn't perfect, partly because I disregarded several aspects of the books that sounded too hokey for me. Too ridiculous. I made myself into a werewolf, but an imperfect one. One who could never fully stop being a beast. He looked at me, his sunken eyes tired and remorseful. When I saw you boys up there, I wanted to kill you. I felt compelled to. I swallowed. But I didn't, he continued. I'm not sure what changed, but after seeing you two, a piece of me returned. A small sliver of humanity, perhaps. I decided to try and warn you later that day by the river. Of the dark, of my mother's intentions. The book, I said. Mysteries of the Cryptids. Yes, he said, flicking another page. I'd stuffed some of her research notes into an old novel she'd written. My hope was that if she saw you with it, she wouldn't grow suspicious. He tapped at the center of the page. Ah, here it is. The Light of Predium. Give me a moment, please. I need to read this carefully. I did, using the time to reflect. 10 minutes ago I'd nearly given up, but then Nolan had given me hope. He'd saved me all over again. Whatever was in that book, he seemed to think it had a real shot at helping fix this disaster. I believed him. There was hope for Eric. Hope for my dad. We could do this, put things back to normal and get off this goddamn mountain and turn this whole experience into exactly what it deserved to be, a repressed memory. I just needed to know what to do. It's as I suspected, Nolan said a short time later. The summoning requires an amount of offerings, or cryptids to put it simply. 4 of them, and a host. That would be your brother. Or you. He shot me a weary smile. I don't understand. Is that good or bad? Well, Nolan said, leaning back and resting the book on his lap. Without the mask, I've lost my ability to heal from my wounds. All this to say that I'm dying, and I should thank you that I'm dying as a man. I suspect that when I leave he let out a wail and clutched his side. Are you okay? I said, realizing what a stupid question it was. Jake had thrown him half the length of a football stadium, his insides were probably damn near mush. Dying, still, he said with a wry grin. But alright otherwise. As I said, when I leave, his offering will be 1 short, and Jake's summoning will be unsuccessful. Wait, I stood up, looking at the runes in the ground. I thought they'd already summoned him. Yes, Nolan said. They have. He's on his way, but crossing worlds is not so easy a task, at least according to these old tomes. He patted the book on his lap. I suspect that Jake's taken them to meet the Lord beyond when he arrives. Isn't that here? I said, staring at the summoning circle. Isn't he arriving in that circle? The cabinet creaked as Nolan leaned back against it. His head rested on the cupboard door and he closed his eyes. Think of the circle as a telephone. It's a way of communicating that their terms have been met. Everything I've read about Per Diem would indicate him to be a prideful being, one who would be loath to enter this world through a dirty cave. He took a difficult breath. When I die, Jake's terms will be broken. Per Diem won't grant him an audience. Great, no Per Diem, but that still left one massive problem. Nolan, I said desperately. How do I stop Jake? How do I help our family? Silver, Nolan grimaced. Haven't you been paying attention? He gave me a grim smile. The trouble, of course, is getting the silver into my brother's heart. That's putting it lightly, I muttered. I doubted the scalpel was long enough to even reach his heart. Once my brother realizes, he said slowly, his words spaced by flinches of pain, that the summoning is being prevented by something, he's likely to realize I've passed on. I don't know what happens then. He's unpredictable, at the best of times. He coughed more blood, and it speckled the book in his lap. What do I do? I said. There wasn't much time left, and there was so much I still didn't know. I can't kill Jake with a scalpel. How do I stop this? His head rolled to the side, looking towards something in the dark of the room. Operating table, beneath it, my father's dagger. Grandpa's dagger? Eric and I hadn't known much about our late grandfather, only that he had been an archaeologist in life. I stood, casting the light in the direction Nolan looked. Sure enough, there was an operating table there, though it felt generous to call it such. It was really more a slab of wood with some leather straps dangling off of it. Is the dagger silver? Nolan nodded. Not much, but it will have to do. Now go, get a head start on me. There was one last thing I had to know first. Something important. When I was younger, Grandma gave me some of that serum. Why haven't I changed yet? If she only gave it to you once, it wouldn't be enough. He took a moment to catch his breath. It takes several doses to induce the transformation. Then I'm not a cryptid? He shook his head. I sighed, relieved. That was one terror I could put to rest, at least for now. Thank you, I said, quietly. The truth was I had so much to say and no time to say it. I wanted to tell him that I was sorry for thinking he was a monster, that I was sorry for attacking him with a fire iron, that he had done more for me than he could ever know. But I didn't have time. "You're a good man," I said, rising to my feet. "Please know that." I hoped it was enough. It was a terrible feeling leaving my uncle to die here, in the cold darkness where his nightmare had been born, but there wasn't any time. When this was finished, I'd come back and pull him out. Give him a proper burial. But right now there were still lives I could save. Lives I needed to save. I made for the exit. "Matthew," Nolan wheezed. I paused, turning my ear toward him. "Don't listen to the voices." The forest was quiet tonight. No sound of deer, no sound of birds, and not so much as the crip of crickets. I sprinted through the woods, avoiding the main trails and sticking to the brush. Bramble and nettle clawed at my jacket, branches hung low and caught me in the face, and the dirt, wet from the storm, shifted with my every step. It didn't matter though, I knew where I needed to be. The cabin was where this had all begun. It was where Jake had ambushed us earlier, and perhaps it was where he intended for all of this to end too. Except this time, I was the one running the ambush. Grandpa's dagger swung at my waist, hanging off my belt and smacking my thigh with every stride. While it was a good deal longer than the scalpel, it certainly wasn't ideal for fighting a 12-foot Sasquatch. Still, it was all I had. Truthfully, I doubted a silver broadsword would have made me feel any more confident. I was terrified either way. On the glass-half-full side of things, it had stopped raining. The temperature felt a good deal warmer too, although I suspected that had something to do with me sprinting in a leather jacket. Above though, the storm clouds still loomed, heavy and gray, and they'd shifted enough to mask the moon entirely. The forest was shrouded in near total darkness. Thankfully, Dad had saved my ass again. I brought a hand to my face and adjusted his night vision goggles, seeing a landscape of greens and blacks. Normally, I'd be concerned about the lenses drawing attention, but I knew Jake couldn't see, not after I'd gouged his eyes out. He did, however, seem to be able to smell us. I reared back my head and spat out a mouthful of mud. I'd rolled around in a puddle of it outside the cave, drenching myself head to toe in muck and grime, and it had managed to get absolutely everywhere. Disgusting? Yeah. But maybe enough to mask my scent. At least, until I got close enough to stab Jake. Or something. Stuff to think about when I got there. Eric was the planner, not me. I operated more on instinct, and I hoped those instincts would serve me better than they had in the cave. All of us were relying on it. It didn't take long to reach the cabin. I slunk along for the last leg of the journey, careful not to make any sounds, since I figured Jake's ears were still in working order. Through the trees, I saw a weak light spilling from one of the windows, though no sign of any movement. I needed to get closer. I glanced about, making sure the area was clear. To my left, there was only Grandma's old spinach patch, and beyond that the walking trail to the river. Good. To my right, my beat-up car, and the road that led down the mountain. Wait. I focused my goggles down the roadway. Was that a fender? No, that was an entire truck. Its front end jutted out of the bushes a short way down the road. No doubt about it. That was Jake's. I wanted to fist pump the air, but I composed myself. Maybe we didn't need to fight Jake after all. If the three of us could get to his truck, we could almost definitely outrun him. Then we'd just come back in the daylight and deal with things once his transformation had worn off. Perfect, I whispered. First though, I needed to get Eric and Dad. The hard part. I dashed across the clearing and pressed myself against the cabin's wall, moving along it to the kitchen window. The light that spilled from it flickered, as if cast by a candle. I pulled the goggles off my head and peered inside. Nothing. Shit. The place looked exactly as I remembered it, right down to the chair I'd busted the window with. Alright, I thought, no need to panic. Somewhere else then. Maybe Grandma's bedroom. Or the living area. I crouched back down, slipping along to the front of the cabin. Its entrance had been torn apart by Jake's previous visit, its front door missing and its entire vestibule sagging. Even the steps that led up to the front porch were cracked and broken, probably not built to withstand the weight of a Sasquatch. I froze. There was a sound coming from the cabin. It sounded like moaning. Long, anguished groans. Fuck. I slipped past the front door, following the sounds along the side of the cabin. There, a few feet away was the dark window to the living area. That's where the sounds were coming from. I flicked on the night vision goggles, orienting myself beneath the window. I wanted to do this as carefully as I could. I slowly rose my head, peering inside. The fireplace was empty, just as I remembered, and I could see bits of Griff's cracked skull where I'd dropped it earlier. The wicker chairs were there too, along with the boxes of Grandma's things, and there, near the far wall, Dad sat in a chair, a rope zigzagged across his chest, lashing him to his seat. I scanned the rest of the room. No sign of Eric. No sign of Jake either. I gave the window a gentle push, and it slid. Good, unlocked. Made sense. What did Grandma have to fear out here? She was the one making the monsters. I opened the window quietly, so quietly that Dad hadn't noticed. His head lolled in the chair, his eyes distant and spacey. The guy looked exhausted. I took another look around, double-checking I was in the clear before raising myself up onto the windowsill. Once I was on it, I slowly lowered myself to the hardwood floor, again scanning the room. Nothing, just Dad and I. So far so good. My footstep creaked on a floorboard and I froze. Shit. My heart raced. Was Jake here somewhere? Had he heard that? My hand rested on the hilt of the silver dagger instinctually. Please, Matthew. Shake it off. Please. Nothing. Either nobody heard the sound, or nobody was here. I made my way to Dad, lifting the goggles off of my eyes. Dad, I whispered, untying the ropes holding him to the chair. Where's Eric? No answer. Just groans. He rolled his head down, eyes milky white. Dad. I gave him a few gentle smacks on the face. He looked drunk. Wasted. Seriously, we need to leave. Now. Another long, low groan. Dad, are you okay? I let the rope drop from my hands, taking a step back. I recognized those eyes. I'd seen them before. I took another step, and something snapped beneath my foot. I looked down. A syringe. 3 of them. No. Matthew, Dad rasped. The river.